Welcome back, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Hope you're having a good week so far. Sheepdog Smokey here, as always. We're going to be looking at more of American history today. Before we get started, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Turn on notifications so that we can help grow the channel as well as widen the conversation. Now, in past videos, we've looked at the formation of the colonies, the differences in the type of colonies, how some were governed by appointed governors, by rulers. Others were basically corporations, while others were just what we would expect of a colony where they were governed by those they selected. Ultimately, it did come to war, and the colonies won, and we became our own sovereign nation. Unfortunately, we did that in a way that left us in pretty dire straits. As we've discussed before, we were broke. I mean, the government, the newly formed government, couldn't even pay the soldiers that had just fought a war to win our freedom. It's understandable, though, that it would take a bit of time to really get everything going, get the ball rolling in a way that would carry the country forward. We know that from 1781 to 1783, during that end period where the war was over, but not everybody really knew. There wasn't a government set up. It was still everybody governing themselves, even though technically under the Articles of Confederation, we were a country. There was that problematic era. Then we had the signing of the Constitution, which officially set up the government. Articles 1, setting up the Congress; 2, setting up the judiciary; 3, setting up the executive. And I may have 2 and 3 backwards. I don't have my copy in front of me. But it's setting up the checks and balances that didn't exist in Parliament. The House of Lords could just decide, no, doesn't matter what the House of Commons says. The King could decide, doesn't matter what Parliament says. Even as recently as just 100 years ago, the monarch had a lot of power, as did the Prime Minister. There's a wonderful story, wonderful movie. Actually, it's Darkest Hour with Gary Oldman as Sir Winston Churchill. It's very true to that point in history where you see that the government as it was set up in Britain really was kind of a detriment to the country. And in some ways kind of still is today, when you have a body of government selected of families that are born into power, an oligarchy. And they can overrule the elected politicians in the House of Commons. We didn't want that, so that's how our founders set up the Constitution. And they knew that this would be a project that would go on for some time. You can see in 1789, we have the Judiciary Act, which founds or sets up the 13 district courts and the 3 circuit courts of appeal. Now, as we know, there are more courts than that now, but the country is vastly larger than it was then. 1790, Alexander Hamilton was part of the plan that just said the U.S. would pay all states' debts related to the war, whether they were state debts or not. It raised tariffs on incoming trade to, 1, make money. Those tariffs went directly to the federal government. And to encourage people to buy locally produced goods. The problem with this is that we didn't have a lot of industry here. We were really just, we had cobblers and hatters and tailors, and we had farmers. That's really it. We weren't producing a lot of goods that you could get from other countries. They were producing a lot of goods you couldn't get here. So the tariffs made the country money, but it also meant goods cost more. It established a national bank that would store money and issue loans. And it established a national mint to produce our money. This was not widely praised. It was not universally accepted and loved because there was some opposition from the South, from states that had already paid off their debt. So they were being told, well, you don't have any debt, but this state does. The government is going to pay it off. Well, that means the southern states that were debt-free didn't get any benefit from that action. It opposed the tariffs due to no manufacturing here, and also the government had paid a lot of its debt to Americans in bonds. And even today, people who hold bonds, not federal treasury bonds or any other kind, they sit there. And unless you have enough money to live your life and let that bond come to maturity, you're kind of stuck. So they would sell their bonds to other people. And those people speculated that the bond would be worth more than they bought it for. So they did lose a little bit, but they still had more money at the end of that sale than they had before it. But they're starting to see that the government's bonds are now coming mature and all this. And they're starting to see that they're not getting the same benefit as other states. Now, one thing I will say, we are 6 to 8 years post-Revolutionary War. The founding of a country is not something that happens overnight. It takes a while to get things rolling. And while I don't like to see someone get a benefit offered to everyone that I don't qualify for because I've already done what the benefit is supposed to do, I can understand that we need all states to start on an even footing. And the government decided we needed this because it was crippling other things. The states could now invest in roads and other things, in loans to their people to start a business, things like that. The issue is, as it always has been, differing opinions on the role of the federal government. Alexander Hamilton was a very loose constructionist. He basically saw the elastic clause as, I can do what is right and proper. I can do what I have to in order to benefit the country. And that doesn't always work. We see it today with people saying this is for the benefit of all, but it's not. We're seeing it right now in D.C. One of the problems they recognized, though, was basically lobbying power. The capital was currently located in New York, very much northern state, and the other states realized that New York could exert pressure on the federal government because they were in New York. 1800 is when it was decided that the capital of the country would lie in a district that is not part of any one state. Ironically, we have people now demanding that D.C. become a state, which would undo the purpose of ceding the power of government outside the boundaries of any of the states in the Union. Of course, the capital being located in New York, it had to move temporarily to Philadelphia while everything was put into place for D.C. And a lot of this comes from the fact that they had seen rebellions where states would either be better equipped to handle them or not equipped to handle them based on the proximity to the federal government. 1794, the Whiskey Rebellion. This is an area where the state had decided to tax whiskey. And whiskey was basically used as money. In fact, the term shot glass, a shot of alcohol or a shot of whiskey, that term is coined because you could take one bullet and trade it for a shot of whiskey. You traded a shot from your handgun for a shot of whiskey. The distillers didn't like this and rebelled. And this is the only time this has happened. But George Washington, who was president at the time, personally led the military force to put the rebellion down. It's never happened anywhere else. 1795, we have the Treaty of Greenville. The natives didn't like expansion, and there was armed conflict. And again, that was put to an end. The treaty was established to cede land in the Northwest to the United States. Then we have in 1793, the 22nd of April, the Neutrality Proclamation. This is one that I actually do disagree with pretty strongly. You see, this is where the French Revolution was happening. And Britain was fighting to keep the government of France in power, basically against those in revolution against them. And it was decided that we would not aid either side, not our former ally, who without them we would probably not have won the Revolutionary War, or Great Britain, who we had pretty strong trade with. I disagree with this pretty strongly because of the fact that in the intervening years after the Revolution, Britain just decided, well, they can't really do anything, so we're just not going to honor the Treaty of Paris. And they wouldn't let them into certain ports, and they put tariffs on U.S. goods over other countries. And they basically were just telling us, yeah, you're free, but you're not going to make any money, and you'll come crawling back. But the government decided we need a way to bolster trade, so we're not going to aid either side. Personally, I would not have supported that. I would have said we're going to aid our former ally. And who knows what that would have done with the revolution in France. We have then Jay's Treaty in 1795. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at the time, John Jay, basically got us past all the animosity, or started to. It did establish that Great Britain would pay U.S. losses. It ended impressment, which improved our trade, but also meant that Great Britain would stop seizing U.S. trade ships, imprisoning those who were working on those trade ships, and then forcing them into the British military to fight for Great Britain, impress them into the military. It also established a commission to settle border disputes, because we do know that Great Britain still had their land in Canada. Spain still had settlements in Florida, and were starting to expand into Central and South America. So this commission would be there to settle land disputes. And this all leads up, and granted this is still all actually before D.C., but it does kind of lead up and show why the federal government needs to be separate from any state, because of the power it holds. And in 1796, George Washington, who had served 2 terms, stepped down, said, I will not run for a 3rd term. He feared the power of that office. He knew the trappings of being made a powerful person. He warned against parties and factions, permanent alliances with foreign nations. He knew what this could lead to, because if there is a permanent alliance with any one nation, you might end up being forced to aid them in a decision that is wrong. An example of this would have been basically what happened in World War II. You see, it wasn't the invasion of Poland that drew Britain into the war. It wasn't the invasions into France. It was Germany crossing through a country that Great Britain had a permanent alliance with. This country was very small, didn't have a military. They had an alliance with Britain that said, if we're attacked, you will defend us. Now, in this case, it was a good thing, because Britain then joined into the war, fighting against the Nazi regime, which ultimately would lead to others joining that alliance and putting an end to a tyrant. But that is not always the case. If we had had a permanent alliance with Great Britain, say, that ended their misuse of trade, ended their impressment, ended their antagonism toward the U.S., then we would have been honor bound to aid them in their fight against those rising up in rebellion to be free in France. We would have basically been honor bound to do what Britain tried to do to us, to another country. Alliances are not bad things. It's just when you have a permanent alliance that you're either locked into doing anything that has to be done to protect that nation or aid them, or you risk making them an enemy. And that's what Washington was warning about. Unfortunately, in many respects, those warnings were not listened to. What we're going to look into next is the beginnings of the problems we face today. The formation of political parties. I have never in my entire adult life, since 1996, my first election that I voted in at 19 years old, until today, 34 years later, in 2020, 24 years later, 6 federal elections, I have never marked straight ticket. I have voted Republican, I have voted Democrat, I have voted Independent, and I have refused to vote. I don't look at a party. I look at a person. And I look at what they have said, what they have done, and what they are not saying and not doing. Currently, we have, just on one issue, one candidate that wants to continue to lower taxes, and one that has openly said your taxes will go up. On another issue, we have one candidate pleading for states to impose the rule of law and stop criminals. And we have another praising criminals and vowing to end certain law enforcement. Now, I know just from the comments you can tell whose party is, or which candidate is which. But I look and I listen to what they say, and then I look at what they've done in their time in office. And I make my decision based on that. I don't care what party you're part of. Sorry about that. Allergies are going a bit nuts today. But a great example of that is, from those who've watched for a while, you know that I am conservative. I've not always been as conservative as I am now, but I am and always have been and always called myself a conservative. I know certain people in Congress that are part of the supposed conservative Republican Party that I would vote for Tulsi Gabbard before I vote for them. She is more liberal than I am, but she's an incredibly intelligent woman, and she knows that her job is to work for the people. It's exactly why she was never going to have a shot in the Democratic primary. She would not toe the Democrat Party line. She openly opposed things that are all but litmus tests to put a D beside your name. In reality, she is a liberal-leaning libertarian. But those tickets don't win. And she ran on the Democratic Party to serve her people. That's what I'm talking about. That's what you need to start doing. Look at the people screaming, "You're not allowed to vote for that person because I say they're evil." And look at the person saying, "Here's what I've done. Here's what I promised to do. I'm asking for your vote." Look at their history. Look at their stance. Look at their statements. Don't look at their verbiage and their phrasing. Okay, I can tell you for a fact that there have been Republicans and Democrats for the last 100+ years that have used language that would have people in port coming off the ship for R&R going, "Dude, that's too rough. Don't talk like that." Vernacular, verbiage, slang, It's something that's different in every state and in every part of every state. It's just the way it is. For someone to say the way things are phrased disqualify you from public office, is that person saying, I have no idea how to begin saying that your stance is bad. So I'm going to demand people ignore what you stand for, and I'm going to tell them they're required to vote for me because the way you phrase things. And sadly, we have people who believe it. And 240 years later, we're in the mess we're in. I've talked long enough. Let me know what you think. As always, be civil. You can get passionate. You can be vehement in your defense of your stance, but be civil. We're not here to scream and yell and hurl insults like children. And I feel we can do that. Make sure to like and share the video to widen the conversation, and so it does affect the YouTube algorithm, as well as make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so that you're notified of every video as it posts. Until next time, have a wonderful day.